Okay, it's happening. Just a minute. Welcome to the Freedom Anarchist News Review from Freedom Press, freedompress.org.uk, freedomnews.org.uk. I'm Freedom editor Uri Gordon, joined tonight by Freedom columnist, writer, and journalist Tabitha Troughton. Good evening.
Hey.
Our headlines tonight: German elections. The country is slowly drifting into the hands of the extreme right. The CDU's desperate attempt to remain relevant under pressure from the AfD not only risk cooperation with the far right party, but also to move ruling parties across Europe further into the camp of populism and fascism. 3 years into the Ukraine war, we now face an authoritarian world order. With Trump and Putin making agreements behind closed doors, Ukrainian people are at risk of being abandoned by the West. And in the UK, Labour uses upcoming welfare cuts to fund increased defence spending, a measure tailored specifically to appeal to the whims of the US president and useless for any other consideration. Tabitha, what's your headline of the week?
My headline of the week is that the Labour government once again unerringly shows that it will do exactly the wrong thing morally, economically, and socially. I think that kind of covers it.
Well, the big question remains why. These are unpopular policies. This increased defense
Indeed.
spending at the expense of welfare would seem to be something that, counterintuitive for them. Is this kowtowing to Trump, emulating those policies? Is this fighting an election campaign that hasn't begun yet? What's your take?
Is this a desperate storm of seeing the public scorn and despise the various policies that he's brought in since getting into power, and trying for a Margaret Thatcher Falklands moment? It is most peculiar. I think the only conclusion one can truly draw is that having arrived in power, swollen with pride but bankrupt of ideas, they literally have no reason to be doing anything except for populist show. So this is yet another take on what they believe is popular. Unfortunately, it isn't. Voices on the right are just as outraged and unpleasantly mocking as voices from the left. The voices from the right are saying, you can't even stop the dinghies. Never mind defend us. And the voices from the left are obviously saying, defend us against whom? Russia's territorial ambitions have, for a long time, extended to getting their former territories back. But there is no sign that they want to invade the UK. So defending us against whom? Yeah, that would be
Well,
it's
the idea that, of course,
in,
Putinist Tsarism is worth opposing, just like American Trumpism and British imperialism. The question is, who exactly are they thinking these policies are popular towards? Is this kind of this old red wall politics fighting the previous election today? Or is it this kind of international gesture more intended for the audience in Washington, D.C., than in, everyday Britain?
um, I'd say yes to that because it seems that the narrative has been ripped away from any kind of domestic setting and projected by a compliant media onto a world stage, where again we've got used to this with Trump, the big lie, fill the Bannon's fill the zone with shit, and it's sort of happening in a very polite British way here. We all know that Starmer is a hollow man with no support whatsoever. And yet we're being shown pictures of him cosplaying in camouflage, parading around the world stage, Guardian columnists writing admiringly of his finding his place in the world. And yet we all know that this is a very thin tissue. And it seems that unreality in a very British way is happening daily now. So,
There is a spectacle now of both, Starmer and Macron and their respective governments sort of playing responsible adult in the room, within NATO, to Trump's White House, and obviously the current increase in defense spending is being justified in terms of British and European countermeasures, if you will, to the chance of the U.S. Abandoning Ukraine and sort of allowing Putin to either make territorial gains or run roughshod over the entire country. It remains a question. I mean, Trump throws away these statements, about Greenland and about Ukraine and about Gaza and about Panama. Um, and it seems that this time around, some of his foreign policy people do see themselves in the role of moderators and sort of dampering things. I mean, certainly when it comes to his Middle East envoy, Stephen Witkoff, he's been far more sort of playing this role of exerting American pressure on the Israeli government in the traditional way,
uh-huh,
rather than being this kind of enabler of Trump's distorted real estate fantasies.
uh-huh,
Um, but it seems that on the European front, it's a role that is falling to European leaders themselves, and that perhaps parts of the U.S. administration are content to have European governmental leaders, playing that adult in the room, in order to carry out this kind of balancing act between Trump and the U.S. geopolitical interest, which he
mhm.
would actually be hindering if those policies were realized.
Um, well, particularly with Israel, the idea that Gaza would be American real estate was touted about at least 2 years ago openly, wasn't it? So this is a continuation of US government policy or a vivid portrayal of US imaginings. On top of which one should note that BP were granted the license to drill to explore for gas around the Gaza coastline, I think a month into the genocide. So all of this is in tandem, and you could argue that the Israeli government have done a splendidly genocidal job in allowing access unfettered for American corporations, and therefore this can now continue. You could call that peace, I suppose, but certainly serving American political interests, yes, geopolitical interests.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Europe playing the role, I mean, I think it's clear again that they are all playing a role. I don't think that. I don't think America will allow itself to be hindered by this in any way. And you're right. There's probably a game strategy for this, well worked out, I would have
I mean,
thought.
sometimes you wonder, right? Sometimes you wonder whether there is one or whether it's just, whatever they expect the headlines to have to be. I mean, the question that, often gets asked about labor, which is a question that also gets asked about the social democratic as if left, as if within various democratic countries, as if is, why kowtow to the far right? I mean, why would people vote for a sort of pale version of Reform UK when they
Uh,
can get the real thing?
Mhm.
And this is something that we've also seen in Germany, apropos the recent elections, of which we reported and commentated today.
Mhm.
As Nikita Evansky writes in today's article on Freedom, the reactionary policies of the existing coalition, made up of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the liberal FDP, have
Mhm.
already made headlines in major progressive newspapers. It was under an SPD chancellor that Germany closed its borders to Schengen and now controls arrivals
Mhm.
by land. Deportations of migrants and repression of their supporters and environmental activists reached new heights. And in cooperation with authoritarian states, in this case Hungary, the German police have continued to repress anti fascist and anti authoritarian movements. All this was done in an attempt to conquer the information space away from the extreme right. It's almost a miracle, writes Nikita, that the coalition fell apart before passing a new security law that would have set a new low for the freedom of citizens and non citizens living in the country.
Mm.
Nevertheless, the SPD coalition was swept away by the conservatives, by AFD in the east. Although they're not going to enter the coalitions, it seems that it is a self-defeating policy on all fronts.
It does, doesn't it? I think. It's reminding me of something that Alexei Sayle said of the Labour right. The Labour left are the nicest people he's ever met, whereas the Labour right, I don't think he swore, but are some of the nastiest, most unpleasant, vile people that he's ever met. So you have to look at a supposedly leftish coalition and supposedly leftist parties in the light that they may actually truly believe that acting in this authoritarian, bordering on fascistic manner and spouting much the same horror that the far right are, the proudly far right are, they might actually also believe in that. I think it's not necessarily a vote chasing exercise, but they might actually believe that it's right for Labour, for example, to prevent people who come to the country from dangerous routes from gaining citizenship. They might actually think that's a good thing in itself, not just a vote winner. But I mean, you're quite right. This signifies a death knell for the supposed grown up in the room centrist policies that they so confidently expected everyone to go for. I mean,
I mean, they might go the way of Macron as a result, but whereas in France, you can still see some kind of far left presence also pushing back against the far right surge. In Britain, so much has been done to decimate working class communities, to atomize society, that that kind of social grassroots presence of the left is so much more difficult to mobilize. I mean, once again, if anything has been proven to us by the mainstream electoral politics escapades of the last several years, is that the parliamentary road to social change truly is closed. And you would hope that that would open the space for more grassroots social movements to make their mark, but that depends on the kind of uh, 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 a base in communities in society.
mm, of
And the
course,
more atomized and broken up a society is, the more difficult that is to ignite.
of course, not impossible, but difficult. And if you consider that people are on top of this cold, hungry, working God knows how many shifts, inadequate housing, and so on and so forth, then any energy for transitional space for social justice movements has been dissipated into sheer attempts to survive. And that is again possibly a deliberate strategy, and I'm sure it could be seen as a very sensible one. Um, if you were a current Labour cabinet member. Yes, it is. It is. It is extraordinary, and the damage that is being done is intense. Although not obviously to the corporations, not to the UK defence industry. Going to Labour's latest defence announcement, who reaped record profits last year because of the Ukraine Russian conflict, because of Israel's latest assault on Palestine. So there are many rich already people benefiting from this, just as they will benefit from BP throwing climate change out of the window and drilling for more oil, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's another point to bring up, really, because that's the other news that was announced today, that BP is basically abandoning the remains of its investments in renewables. I mean,
Hmm.
on the one hand, that was always sort of a bit of greenwash, right? I mean,
Mhm.
because actual investment in renewables was never a major chunk of what they do.
Hmm.
uh, on the other hand, it seems that it's in a way, it's part of the same sort of um, oh, we're surging to the right atmosphere
Yeah,
that labor's policies are also part of, this sense
yeah.
of, okay, well, we can now sort of abandon these vestiges of sustainability,
Mhm.
because they're the new boss is in Washington, is the same as the bosses now in Moscow and Beijing.
Mhm.
There's not
Mhm.
even a pretense of trying to yeah, meet any Paris targets or anything else. And again, we still expect the UK to approve by itself new North Sea oil and gas drilling. I mean, it's as if the Labour government has no agenda of its own except to run with the zeitgeist. And if that happens to be right wing, then they're going to go with it rather than against it. And the only people who can go against it, yeah, are not going to be the ones in Westminster and Whitehall. They're going to be people in communities around the country. It's going to have to come
Mhm.
to people's grassroots organizing in order to provide alternatives to that.
And legal challenges such as the one to the Rosebank, I think it was, and so on and so forth. But we have to also remember that Labour, proactively was scrapping its climate change commitments before Trump ever got back into power. So in a sense, it's led that oil field. But I mean, it's going to be spun as, oh, brilliant, more drilling for oil and gas. Energy prices will come down by people who sadly don't realize that global oil demand has already dropped and that this has had no effect on the vulture pricing of the corporate owned energy companies. It's
Yeah, I
just,
mean, the link between consumer price and
yeah,
the
exactly.
supply side is tenuous at best.
Well, yeah, it doesn't stand up at all, even if you look at it for 5 minutes. But yeah, that's what people are going to believe because they're now cold and frightened of being cold, and their grandmothers are even colder thanks to Labour. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Really interesting one. I think obviously Labour will just kowtow to the nearest big boy. I mean, I think that's clearly what will happen. I don't know how Starmer's going to square this with the 3 billion a year commitment he made to Ukraine. Um, Presumably that will just be boosting UK defence industry profits and US military profits. But
I
yeah.
mean, that level of subsidies, yeah, for effective subsidies for
Mm.
arms industries,
Mhm.
yeah, are on parallel with what goes on with airplane fuel
Mhm.
and everything else. And now, of course, we see Trump threatening to increase tariffs on EU imports. And so it seems increasingly likely that, I mean, do you think Starmer is trying to sort of go with the European Union despite Brexit, not going as far as formal return to the EU, but based on his understanding that British financial and business elites are interested in that connection. Um,
Are they still?
it seems to me that in terms of like what's been going on in the United States, Wall Street might be headed for a crash. I
Hmm.
mean, the way in which the
Very
White
likely.
House
Hmm.
has recently sort of sought to increase its influence, also through Elon Musk's department on, yeah, the legal interpretation done by all federal offices, and on the stock exchange.
Hmm.
That may move things towards an understanding that fascism 2.0 goes hand in hand with kleptocracy,
Hmm.
and that may move the U.S. economy the way of the Russian one, not in terms of sanctions, but in terms of investor profiles, where
Hmm.
it is the corrupt, gray zone, criminal kind of material that is going the way of those countries. Um, that might definitely harm the American stock exchange, right? I mean,
Huh?
there is a sense in which the incompetence and sort of populist ham-fistedness
Hmm.
of Trump and Musk is not in the direct short-term interests of global
Hmm.
capital.
Yeah.
Of course, they would always prefer authoritarian government, but when things come to, I mean, it's on par with mismanaging the pandemic,
Hmm.
right? I mean, in general, these things that are mismanaged have costs for corporate pockets
Hmm.
in the end,
Although this
and
is
and
this is where Starmer may have unusually found an answer for those poor affected shareholders, because after the announcement of the increase in defense spending, the FTSE 100 went up.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the
So all we
FTSE.
have to do is spend, a massive amount of the public's money on armaments, including, I mean, have you seen what they're promising us? Automated systems and nuclear submarines and drones and all the rest of it. And then a certain number of people who hold certain numbers of shares will benefit enormously. So perhaps that is the answer. Just
Well, I mean, I think there is this attempt, to project stability against the erraticism of the Trump regime,
Mhm.
and since the Trump regime's instability is now associated with the sort of finance and high tech sector,
Mhm.
then the arms and oil sector is obviously the other
The other ones,
counterbalancing
yeah.
force, which in the U.S. is of course has been more strongly identified with the Republican Party so far,
Mhm.
but it seems very clear that the financial and high tech sector is also making that jump to the right, that it is effectively abandoning the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
But I think indeed, the British government may be hedging its bets on that kind of good old stable industries
Mhm.
in order to prop up essentially the FTSE as against the Dow Jones. We'll
Mhm.
have to see how that develops. These things are ultimately going to affect all of us that have electricity bills, all of
Mhm.
us that have to pay taxes, all of us that have uh, you know um, some reliance uh,
Eating.
on food.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, again, another Labour policy which is incomprehensible, morally and economically. The farming policy is again one of the very clever ways that you unite the right and the left in absolute outrage and condemnation, because nobody can understand why they did this. Nobody can understand why they put the ceiling for inheritance tax so low that it was going to force small farmers to sell off their land to BlackRock. I suppose that's possibly one of the reasons behind it, but there we are. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think what unites all
Well,
of
that's possible. I mean, like we farming is
yeah. Mm,
no, I mean farming is this sort of high asset, low income
mhm,
situation, you know, where people might, and especially with the prices of land being what they are, people might have, land that may be worth a
mhm.
couple of million, but bringing in, 30K
14,
a
yeah,
year or
yeah,
less.
yeah, absolutely. That would be quite a lot for an average small farmer, actually.
That's right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but the land value is
Mm,
what's determining that. And of course, with there never really having been land reform in this country, we still
mhm,
have a lot of tenant farming, we still have a lot of agribusinesses, taking control. And I mean, it may be BlackRock, or it may be, the Cavendish Grosvenors of the world, yeah, the kind of major landowners and real estate owners of this country, who are, much of them the same families that have been owning a lot of
mm.
the land here since 1066.
Yeah, exactly.
That's that other layer
Hmm.
that you obviously get in Britain.
Hmm.
Um, okay, well, I mean, is there any optimistic or more positive thing in the news that
Well,
you'd like to share with us that we can bring in order to end this on a sweeter
yeah,
note?
of course. I mean, I think it's the sort of word that covers generally. I'm not a Freudian, but the word that covers generally what the current psyche of the oligarchs and the corporations is thanatos. You know, the love
The
of
death urge.
the death urge, the death drive. That's all.
Hmm.
You know, sort of
I asked
loving.
for something optimistic.
Well, but of course, in Freudian speak, there's an opposite and equal force, which is eros. So everyone should watch Jilly Cooper's Rivals, which is a splendid antidote to all of this. Yeah, no, it's difficult to see a positive, except that um, the facts are so clear now that the people are not being represented by their government that one hopes for a mass awakening to the facts, and I think that would be a great thing. What would happen then, I wouldn't be able to prescribe, but
Well, it seems that, indeed, a lot of the effort of the right in the past years has been to give things, first of all, just to um, muddle the waters in terms of what is real and what isn't.
Mhm,
Normalize fake news, normalize falsehoods on social media,
mhm,
and increase nationalism and xenophobia
mhm,
in, explicitly, in order to avert what might otherwise be a radical left conclusion drawn from the unresponsiveness of elites and the erosion of democratic legitimacy. The
mhm,
fact that, I mean, what you're saying is true. The facts are all there for people to see. We are being ruled by unaccountable elites that are increasingly coming to look like a 2.0 version of the way politics looked like 100 or even 150 years ago.
mhm,
While we've got Victorian era diseases returning to emergency rooms in the poorest part of the country, and
mhm,
also gaps between rich and poor that are as large as they've been for 120 or 130 years.
mhm,
And with all that plain to see, the the propaganda forces on the right are either pushing for people to develop some kind of cult of personality and admiration towards people like Trump and Musk, and what to us might seem laughable or cringy, is a widespread political phenomenon in discourse
mhm.
in English-speaking, American-speaking
Yeah,
society. I mean, to say
yeah.
nothing of the wide admiration enjoyed by figures like Putin or Netanyahu or Orban in parts of their own societies. I mean, there are those who resist them, but there are also those who support them, and that added to the nationalist element and the normalization of fake news seems to fulfill that function of thwarting what would be an otherwise radical left response.
Indeed,
Uh,
and if you look at very simple policies like nationalization of energy, for example, that's not even a radical left response. 70 odd percent of conservative voters think energy should be nationalized. This is
Rails, water, yes.
and water and keep the NHS public and so on and so forth. These are all very, to reclaim the term, old-fashioned centrist, sensible policies, and what's happening is this sort of death spiral around us where that remains hidden. And we also have to remember that this could be caused by bots, that last time Trump's Twitter account was examined, hundreds and hundreds of thousands were fake followers. We mustn't get too swept away with the illusion that these people are either elite or popular. I think it's very possible that neither is the case.
The
So,
perception is being managed to make it
absolutely,
look like that, and this
absolutely.
is not just the bots, it's also
Media.
the editors desks of the mainstream media,
Yeah,
right? The way
yeah,
in which everybody from the Guardian to the Telegraph and rightwards is cooperating with
yeah,
the militarist agenda, with the kind of pro NATO, pro EU as institutions agenda, rather than anti-Putin, pro-Ukrainian people agenda. Is
yeah.
quite two quite separate things. And yeah, I
Mm.
mean, it's only really voices like us right now that are presenting an alternative. So our 600 viewers,
Hello.
I'm sure will. Hello. Well, I mean, I think right now on live, we've got
Well,
quite fewer more than this. I think we've got about 3 watchers right now, but we've
bless
got
them,
600 on the channel,
bless them.
and hopefully that
Well,
others will see
even
this later. Yeah.
even three. I mean, there's a there was a psychological study done by Noel Neumann back in the 70s, called, which was labeled "The Spiral of Silence," and it was about exactly this, that by artificially inflating the xenophobic nastiness of the few who supported it, people were more likely to silence their own opposition if they felt that that was actually the popular stance.
Right.
And yeah, so whatever one does, one must fight against being sucked into the spiral of silence. This is not popular and it's not good.
Well, that's interesting. It's kind of using this sort of illusion
Mhm,
of a mass
mhm.
to trigger our conformist
Yep.
instincts. Well, I mean, I hope I've gotten rid of most of that by now, but yeah, there's still this sort of cop in your head effect
Yeah.
that even comes with being the person who stands there with their arms folded while everybody else is doing
Oh,
the
yeah,
Nazi salute,
absolutely.
like in that
Yeah.
famous picture,
Yeah.
and that's our I think that's our role right now.
Indeed.
Okay, well, on that optimistic note, I think we shall close this
Yeah.
slightly shorter version of the Anarchist News Review for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us, Freedom columnist, writer, and journalist Tabitha Troughton, and hopefully we will have you on the show again and even more regularly. To those watching, don't forget to follow us on freedomnews.org.uk. We are on Instagram. We are on Blue Sky. We are on Facebook. We are on Telegram. We are probably on other social media that I've forgotten.